Hi guy, welcome back TV Spoilers. Young and the Restless Spoilers Genoa City in these hours is no longer a town running on habit, but a machine tightened by panic. Where every missed call and every stretched silence can become evidence against a mother, a wife, a friend. Mariah's name is repeated like a fresh cut that won't stop bleeding. And Dominic becomes the center of a collective fear, one child forcing adults to realize how powerless they are when what they love most slips beyond reach. Sharon moves through familiar streets that feel like thin ice, because the more she thinks, the more she understands that the most frightening part isn't what Mariah may have done, but why Sharon failed to see the warning signs sooner. That guilt doesn't give Sharon permission to soften, it hardens into a brutal engine, pushing her to drag the truth into daylight at any cost, even if it tears apart relationships she once tried to protect. In Sharon's mind, scattered fragments about Mariah's mental state and the old poison of Ian's influence begin to lock together into a picture that grows darker by the hour, a picture that doesn't need a single new detail to make her chest tighten. And because Genoa City has learned that danger doesn't always arrive with a visible enemy, but can be born from the shadows inside a person, Sharon refuses to accept any easy explanation like Mariah just snapped. Her fear has a sharper shape than that. Mariah is being pulled by something within her, something with Ian's name, something that once broke her and taught her to disappear, something that can return like a voice that never fully left. Tessa's apartment is not a battlefield in the physical sense, but the air inside is heavy as smoke made of exhaustion, grief held down too long, and questions no one wants to answer. Sharon faces Tessa with a severity that borders on cruelty, not because Sharon wants to wound her, but because she understands the price of delay. Dominic does not have time for adult hesitation. Mariah, whatever state she is in, does not have time for silence disguised as privacy. Sharon doesn't attack with loud theatrics or dramatic tears. She attacks with a breath that won't slow, with eyes that refuse to look away, with questions placed one after another like stones on Tessa's chest. What did Mariah say when she was most afraid, when she felt she belonged to no one, when she believed there was no way back? What place did she ever name as somewhere she could vanish from the world and never be found? Sharon forces Tessa to stare at a brutal truth. Blind loyalty is no longer love. It can become an accomplice to tragedy. In that instant, Tessa feels split down the middle. One half of her remains the wife who once loved Mariah enough to keep secrets so Mariah wouldn't crumble. The other half is the mother of Aria, the woman who can't ignore that another child, Dominic, has been dragged into a storm that should never touch him. The struggle shows itself in a trembling no one would notice unless they truly watched, not the tremble of cold, but the tremble of betrayal. If she speaks, she betrays Mariah. If she stays silent, she betrays Dominic. And if she continues to hide, she betrays herself, because she will spend the rest of her life haunted by the question of what might have changed if she had spoken sooner. Tessa clings to a fragile boundary. Mariah shared those things in absolute trust, and that trust is one of the last threads holding Mariah to this life. But Sharon will not allow trust to become an excuse. She presses urgency like a hammer, striking again and again, signal, time, distance, and the vulnerability of a child somewhere beyond their hands. Sharon doesn't need Tessa to explain love. Sharon needs coordinates. Tessa looks down as if the floor might offer an answer that hurts less. She thinks of Mariah as a child, someone who learned to survive by disappearing from whatever scared her. She thinks of how Mariah sometimes spoke of peace as if it didn't belong to her, as if calm only existed somewhere far away and sealed shut. Tessa understands that the safe hideaway Mariah once mentioned is not merely a location. It's a symbol. It's the last rope Mariah grabs when her inner world collapses. And that is exactly why naming it feels like handing Sharon a key to the most private part of Mariah, the part Mariah might never have wanted anyone to touch. And then Tessa remembers the strange sensation of recent days. Mariah hasn't been present the way she used to be. She hasn't fully been here, even when she stood right in front of Tessa. There were moments when Mariah's eyes seemed to look through Tessa towards someone else, some shape that lived only in Mariah's mind. There were silences so long Tessa wondered whether she was speaking to Mariah or to an obsession wearing Mariah's face. In the shadow of Mariah's old wounds and Ian's lingering poison, Tessa begins to believe that secrecy is no longer a blanket of safety. Secrecy is a pit. At last, under Sharon's relentless pressure, Tessa says it. Not with relief, but with something breaking. She describes a remote, aging cabin and isolated place Mariah once called her safe hideaway from childhood, the place she ran to when the world became too loud, too frightening, too unfair. Tessa doesn't paint the cabin as a paradise. She speaks of it like a scar, old, hidden, distant, and steeped in the years when Mariah learned to vanish instead of asking for help. The moment the place name leaves her mouth, Tessa feels the irreversible snap of it. She can't bring herself to meet Sharon's gaze immediately. She only feels her heart pounding as if it's trying to flee, and in her head a fear rises larger than the cabin itself. If Mariah really is there, is she trying to protect Dominic or trying to turn Dominic into the only family she still feels she can keep? And if Mariah is listening to cruel whispers in her own mind, that cabin might become a refuge or the place where everything crosses the point of no return. At the same time, elsewhere in Genoa City, Devon is clinging to technology the way a drowning man clings to a piece of wreckage. He doesn't have time to sit still, doesn't have the luxury of telling himself, "We'll find them," as if optimism were a plan. Devon keeps tracking Mariah's phone location, watching the flicker of signal like he's watching a loved one's heartbeat on a monitor strong, weak, gone. Then returning with the kind of hope that feels almost cruel. He understands that a weak signal is not just a battery issue or bad terrain. A weak signal means they may be moving slower than fear. And every minute that passes is another minute Dominic lives in a world that isn't his. Devon can't stop thinking of Mariah as family, and that makes his anger complicated in the worst way. Anger that Dominic was taken, anger that Mariah might have done this, and pain raw. Surprising pain that if Mariah did it in a mental collapse, it means she fell somewhere no one reached in time. Questions multiply in Devon's mind like sparks in dry air. Is Mariah panicking? Is she lucid? Is she crying? Is Dominic terrified? Is anyone with them? And the most frightening question of all, if Mariah chose to disappear, where would she go? Then the signal appears faint but precise in a way that turns his blood cold. And it matches perfectly with the area Tessa has just named. The moment hits like a door cracking open in a black hallway. The light doesn't solve everything, but it gives them a direction to run. Devon immediately contacts Sharon, and in that urgent exchange, the two of them are linked by the same current, hope braided with dread. Hope because at last they have a point on the map, something real to chase. Dread because the point comes from a childhood secret, a place Mariah once used to vanish from the world. If Mariah chose to go back there, it means she is repeating an old survival pattern. When she panics, she runs. When she hurts, she disappears. When she believes she has no one, she locks herself inside a place no one can reach. And if Ian, whether real or only a ghost inside her mind, is still whispering in her ear, that cabin could become the place those whispers sound the loudest. Sharon prepares to move not like an ordinary mother searching for her child, but like a woman racing her own guilt. She knows every step she's about to take could shove everything in a different direction. If Mariah feels hunted, she could panic harder. If they arrive too late, they might miss the moment Dominic most needs to be brought home safely. If they arrive in time, but handle it wrong, they could push Mariah over the edge right in front of them. Sharon doesn't speak those fears aloud. She swallows them like fire because she knows Tessa is standing there, freshly stripped of her right to keep a secret. And if Sharon breaks, Tessa will break with her. Tessa, meanwhile, feels like someone who just opened a door without knowing whether salvation or ruin waits on the other side. She wants to go with them, and she is terrified to go with them. She fears seeing Mariah at her worst, fears Dominic's eyes looking at her like she's the one who arrived too late, fears that she won't remain standing if that cabin is filled with evidence of a Mariah who no longer knows her own mind. But no matter how hard Tessa tries to hold herself together, her body betrays her. Every breath is quick. Every movement is rushed, as if she's trying to outrun the decision she has already made. And once everything shifts into motion, the tension becomes something sharper, the tension of the instant before the storm strikes. Devin keeps his gaze fixed on the signal, but as the moment to leave arrives, it starts to feel like a cruel joke. That faint signal could disappear at any second, and if it vanishes, they'll be thrown back into the dark. Sharon clings to the only certainty she has left. A mother doesn't get to hesitate. Tessa forces herself to believe that naming the cabin is not betrayal, but the only way to pull Mariah back before it's too late. Yet the harder she believes, the louder her fear echoes. What happens when they open that cabin door? What happens when Mariah sees them? Will Mariah experience it as rescue or as the final invasion of the only peace she can still pretend to have? The plan go to the cabin sounds simple in the mouth, but inside each of them it is a leap off a cliff. Sharon carries the ruthless resolve of someone who swore she would never miss the signs again. Devin carries the anger of a father terrified of losing a child and the pain of a friend terrified of losing Mariah in a different way, losing her to darkness, to obsession, to a collapse no one reaches in time. Tessa carries the ache of loving someone who is lost, wanting to protect, but also wanting to pull her home. Wanting to honor secrets, but unable to let secrets swallow a child. And above all of it, Genoa City seems to hold its breath, because some stories don't wait until people are ready to explode. Some tragedies only need a single door to open. The hook arrives at the exact moment hope is finally warming in their chests. Devin's confirmation comes in. The match is perfect. Everything seems to have a clear direction, then the dot on the screen stutters like a heartbeat that suddenly can't keep pace. It flickers, fades, weakens, and hovers on the edge of going dark entirely, forcing them to move now immediately before the last trace of Mariah disappears from Genoa City as if she never existed at all. Genoa City has slipped into a very particular kind of chaos, one that doesn't always come with sirens or official announcements people can cling to, but with the sensation of being squeezed tighter minute by something that's falling out of reach. Dominic's disappearance steals the town's normal rhythm, and the most terrifying part isn't simply what someone may have done, but that no one can be certain what state Mariah is in, who or what is guiding her, and how far she might go. What was once dismissed as a sealed past, the lingering shadow of Ian, returns in a quiet but ruthless way, forcing everyone into choices that pit emotion against safety, trust against survival instinct. The greatest fear isn't a faceless kidnapper. The greatest fear is seeing a familiar name attached to an unforgivable act, as if the truth itself is cracking every bond it touches. The idea that Mariah has been pushed, haunted, and warped by Ian's influence feels less like speculation and more like an old fracture in the foundation finally splitting wide until Dominic becomes a dangerously misplaced anchor for a desperate attempt to feel whole again. Inside that storm, Nate's unease is different from Devin's. His anxiety isn't loud, doesn't explode into reckless motion right away. It lodges in every detail like a thorn under the skin, sharper the longer it stays quiet. Nate watches Devin trying to hold on to a single belief that Mariah still loves Dominic, and he understands how that belief is both the rope keeping Devin from collapsing and the trap that could blind him if the situation is worse than they dare admit. Nate cannot shake the certainty that Ian has done something to Mariah, whether through words, memory, or a kind of psychological manipulation powerful enough to bend her sense of right and wrong. Devin doesn't fully deny it either. In his desperation, he can feel that Ian's return has pushed Mariah into a spiral, into a place where fear and fixation can masquerade as purpose. And Nate is forced into a chilling thought. Mariah may be treating Dominic as a way to rebuild herself, an impossible reset button, because she no longer knows how to reach peace through anything healthy. That is why, when Nate and Devin talk about tracking down Ian's private residence, it isn't a random tangent or a convenient theory. It is the most logical reflex of two men who are starting to believe the source of this distortion isn't a single impulsive moment. Ian doesn't have to stand in the town square to cause harm. He only has to exist as a psychological hook, an invisible fingerprint that yanks Mariah back toward years she believed she had survived. Nate doesn't voice his fear in melodrama. He fears they will keep chasing the phone, the dot on a map, while forgetting that Ian may have prepared layers of protection and escape routes. Devin is different. Every plan becomes secondary to the one command hammering inside his chest: bring Dominic home. In Devin, pain is not a separate emotion. It is fuel, and sometimes that fuel threatens to burn him too, because he will run anywhere if that is where his son's trace leads. Meanwhile, Sharon and Tessa are drowning in a confrontation neither of them had time to prepare for. The truth about Mariah doesn't fall like a neat document with clear signatures. It falls like a cold stone, crushing every comforting story Sharon has used to survive hard seasons. Sharon carries two emotions stacked on top of each other: the mother's instinct to shield her daughter from judgment, and the adult's terror of knowing that some actions once committed create consequences that cannot be negotiated away. Tessa is trapped between guilt and resistance, between recognizing that Mariah has been unwell for a long time and refusing to become the traitor who admits she saw signs and still couldn't stop the collapse. The most frightening part of their conflict isn't who is right or wrong. It's that both have reasons to fall apart. Sharon because she feels she missed her daughter's pain. Tessa because she feels she wasn't strong enough to pull Mariah back from the dark before Dominic was dragged into it. And when Sharon presses responsibility, if only through her stare and relentless urgency, Tessa feels forced to choose between loyalty to Mariah and moral duty to a child. Their argument stops being private the moment Devin does what any father might do when he believes the situation has outrun his ability to control it. He clings to Mariah's phone location like the last thread connecting him to Dominic. Recent days prove Mariah hasn't stayed still. She has moved, shifted hiding places, tried to turn running into hiding as if changing the label could soften the guilt. The fact that Mariah has taken Dominic on the road, continuing to search for shelter while insisting she can still build a life for them, reveals something terrifyingly clear. She isn't just having a fleeting panic. She is acting on a warped internal plan, one that Ian has pushed, encouraged, and fed. Then the location pings with a jolt that feels like electricity through bone. No more vague regions or wide zones that breed hopelessness. This time, it confirms Mariah is at a roadside rest stop public enough to be overlooked, quiet enough for a car to sit without drawing attention for too long. The signal doesn't bring pure relief. It brings hope with barbs. Because if Mariah is there, Dominic may be within reach, but it also means Mariah is cornered. A cornered person can do anything to keep what they believe is theirs. Devin sees that risk with brutal clarity. He no longer views this as a search. He sees it as a situation that could ignite into catastrophe with one wrong reaction, one step too fast, one word that spikes Mariah's panic. That is why Devin makes the agonizing decision to call the police before going himself. It tears through him because a father's instinct is to rush in and take his child back with bare hands if necessary. But Devin also knows that if Mariah is truly unstable, if Ian has pushed her into paranoia or desperation, then Devin arriving alone could provoke a more violent response. He doesn't call the police because he wants to punish Mariah immediately. He calls them because he fears a single reckless second could put Dominic in danger. In this moment, love isn't warmth. Love becomes a ruthless risk calculation measured in seconds, in distance, in what a frightened mind might do. When the police are deployed, the atmosphere changes instantly. What was once a private family crisis becomes public by force. The police do not need Mariah's history of love or Sharon's years of protecting her daughter from the world. They need what is in front of them: a boxed-in vehicle, a suspect, and the likelihood that a child has been taken unlawfully. The officer's quiet approach doesn't ease the tension. It sharpens it because everything begins to feel like it is moving toward a point of no return. Devin stands inside an unbearable split. He wants to step out of the role of the man who called for help and become the father who storms in. But he also knows one wrong move could turn that rest stop into the place where Dominic is hurt physically or emotionally for life. Sharon and Tessa arrive just as the police begin to engage Mariah, and the sight hits like a fist to the lungs. Sharon is no longer allowed to be only a panicked mother. She becomes a witness to a public confrontation where her daughter may be treated like a criminal in front of strangers. Tessa is no longer allowed to be only a torn wife. She becomes someone connected to the story in the eyes of outsiders, even though she didn't take Dominic. On the drive there, they may have clung to a fragile hope that they could talk Mariah down, pull her back through family bonds, make her let Dominic go without the cold machinery of law. But the moment they see the police, they understand the story has shifted into a different orbit, one where everything is recorded, assessed, and potentially stamped with consequences that do not bend. Their personal reckoning becomes a public crisis, and it fractures Sharon and Tessa in different ways. Sharon feels stripped of the right to be a mother in the way she needs most, the right to hold her daughter close and drag her back from a mistake in private. With tears and pleading that no one else sees, she is forced to watch Mariah approached as a threat, while in Sharon's heart Mariah is still the wounded child who has survived too much. Tessa is struck by her deepest fear, that the truth will turn Mariah into a case before anyone can see her as a human being unraveling. Tessa wants to run forward and shield Mariah from the sharp gaze of judgment, but another voice clamps down just as hard. Dominic must be safe, and if Mariah isn't rational, their softness may not be enough. And Devin, watching the police tighten around the car, swallows the cruelest realization. He has turned his family's nightmare into a matter of law, and he cannot know whether that decision will save his son or trigger Mariah into doing something irreversible. But he also knows there are no clean choices left. He is not living in a story where the right answer exists. He is living in a story where every answer has a cost, and he can only choose the cost that seems least dangerous to Dominic. At the edge of the scene, Nate cannot pretend he is outside this. His unease now has a clearer shape. Ian is not just a name from the past, but a force pressing into every decision, every mile of flight, every warped justification Mariah might be using to hold herself together. Nate watches the chain connect Ian destabilizing Mariah clinging to Dominic as a false reconstruction, Devin forced to call police to reduce the risk. Sharon and Tessa dragged into a public crisis they were never emotionally ready to face. In that moment, the idea of locating Ian's home stops being a vague plan. It becomes a survival-level suspicion. If they get Mariah but never cut the root of the manipulation, this story will repeat in another form, with another victim, another collapse. No one can see clearly what is happening behind the windshield. Dominic might be asleep, terrified, silent because children sense adult fear even when no one speaks. Mariah might be trembling, rigid, telling herself this is proof the whole world is against her, exactly the kind of narrative Ian has always been skilled at planting. Sharon can't find a steady breath because imagining Dominic in that car is enough to make her want to scream, but she cannot scream. Tessa's heart feels crushed because she realizes love is no longer a shelter. Love is now something that can be dissected, questioned, turned into motive in strangers' eyes. Devin stands in a cold hollow so deep he fears he won't survive if the car door opens the wrong way. The drama of the rescue isn't about who runs faster or who shouts louder. It lives in the moment time stretches until it feels ready to snap. The police step closer, and that single step is enough for Sharon to sense her family's future splitting into another branch, one where Mariah is arrested, Dominic is carried out, and everyone exhales while a long chain of consequences begins. Nate looks at Devin and sees the collision of determination and despair. Devin wants to believe Mariah won't hurt Dominic. But he also fears that belief is exactly what Ian has exploited to keep everyone one step behind. And just as the tension peaks right before the second that could decide everything, the important clue slowly emerging becomes a needle driven into their awareness. If Mariah has been forced to stop at a roadside station, if the police have already surrounded her, if Sharon and Tessa are here, then something else may be operating underneath it, an invisible hand still controlling the pulse of this story from somewhere offstage. And that name is not Dominic, not Devin, not Sharon, not Tessa. It is Ian, and he may be waiting for this exact moment to pull the final string. The hook lands like ice. Blue-red lights shiver across the car windows like artificial heartbeats. The officers stand close enough that any movement inside becomes a threat. Sharon and Tessa freeze because no one dares to breathe too hard. Devin's grip tightens until it feels like bone might crack. And Nate, instead of staring only at the car, looks toward the darkness stretching down the road as if waiting for a sign from somewhere else, proof that Ian isn't merely a past that returned, but a present that is still here, ready to turn this rescue into a trap that will cost them everything in the next episode. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.